Hello and welcome back to another full step-by-step build guide, and today I'm going to be showing you how to build a PC in the brand new Fractal Torrent Nano. So I was a big fan of the original Fractal Torrent, and in fact it was my case of the year for 2021. So I'm really keen to be doing a build today in their shrunken down ITX version of the Torrent. Now also releasing today is the Fractal Torrent Compact, which is in between size of the Nano and the original Torrent. So I'm also going to be doing a full step-by-step build guide in that case, as well as case reviews of both the Nano and the Compact. So if you want to see those videos, you'll find links to them in the description. Let's take a look at the other parts I've chosen for today's build. For the motherboard, I'm going to be using the BIOSTAR B660 GTN, which is part of their racing line of motherboards. For the CPU, I'm going to be using Intel's 12th Gen i7, the 12700K. Keeping our CPU cool, I'm going to be using BQAT's Dark Rock Pro 4. To use this cooler with one of the new B660 or Z690 motherboards, you're going to have to get BQAT's LGA 1700 mounting bracket. BQAT will send this to you for free, and you'll find a link to where you can get that from in the description. For RAM, I've got 32GB of Kingston Fury Beast RGB at 3600 MHz. For storage, our motherboard will accommodate up to 2 M.2 SSDs, and that's exactly what I'm going to be installing. Both of the drives I'm going to be using today are from Sabrent, and I've got a Gen 4 drive, their Rocket 4 Plus in 2TB capacity, and I've also got a Gen 3 drive, the Rocket, in 1TB capacity. Powering the whole build, I'm going to be using the Fractal IN+2 Platinum 860 watt fully modular power supply. For the graphics card, I'm going to be using the MSI RTX 3060 Gaming X Trio. The final part for today's build is an additional Fractal Prisma fan, the AL12, which I'm planning to use at the rear as an exhaust fan. Okay, so that's all the parts, let's get on with the build. The first thing I want to do is prepare the case. As we go, I'll point out the main case features. To remove the tempered glass side panel, we simply just need to pull here at the back, and then the panel can be lifted away. The other side panel is removed in exactly the same way, just pull it away at the back and lift away. Taking a look at the panels we've just removed, you'll notice the panel at the back has a darker tint than the one on the front. The other thing to point out, at the top of the panels we do have a screw hole. There's screws in the accessory box. You can secure the panels to the case, which is really useful. If you're moving the case, it means the panels aren't going to come out accidentally. The other place I found this useful in the original Torrent was at the back of the case. I had a lot of cable extensions, and they applied pressure on the panel, and the panel would pump off occasionally. That was until I secured it with a screw, and that means it's not going to come off accidentally and break. Taking a look at the case's front I/O, we've got a power and reset button. We've got two USB Type A connectors and a single Type C connector, and we've got separate headphone and microphone jacks. To remove the case's top panel, all we need to do is slide it backwards, and then it can be lifted up and away. At the top of the case, we've got one of the two case accessory boxes. I'll show you what's contained in both of these boxes later in the video. So our power supply is going to go at the top of the case, and the case will accommodate full-size ATX power supplies up to 200mm in length. We've got a really nice cutout at the top of the case, and it's to help you plug in your EPS power connector to the top left-hand side of the motherboard. The motherboard is going to be installed right up to the top of the case, and you're really going to struggle to plug it in the main body of the case. But this is going to be really straightforward, plugging it in through this little cutout before you put your power supply into the top of the case. We've got a hard drive tray at the top of the case, and in the tray itself you're going to be able to install one 3.5-inch or one 2.5-inch drive. There's also the option to mount an additional 2.5-inch drive to the underside of the drive tray. The hard drive tray can be installed in two different positions. At the moment we've got 172mm between the drive tray and the back of the case. It can be moved, we just need to loosen the thumb screw and the drive tray can lift up and away. There's additional notches here, we can move it along, so the I/O cables will get in the way, so we need to push it past them first of all, get it installed in the little notches at the front, and then we've got an additional place to secure it here. And now we have 210mm from the drive tray to the back of the case. We'll go ahead and remove this for now. To remove the case's front panel, we just need to pull down from the top, and then the front panel can be lifted away. You can see our pre-installed 180mm ARGB fan at the front. We do have a full-length dust filter at the bottom. It simply pulls out from the bottom. Taking a look at the front panel we've just removed, we've got another dust filter behind it. To remove it, we just need to pull this up, and the dust filter can be removed. Taking a look at the rear compartment, it's good to see we've got cable restways, plenty of Velcro cable straps, and rubber grommets over the cutouts. The cable routing space is 29mm. We can mount a further two 2.5-inch drives to this little panel at the back. It's removed with a thumb screw, loosen the thumb screw up, and then we can simply remove the panel. Taking a look at the rear of the case, because our power supply is at the top, the cable is going to look quite untidy running down to the wall. Fractal have thought about this and they've included some Velcro cable straps to help you manage the cable down to the bottom, so it's going to look much tidier. You can also see here we've got 3 horizontal PCIe slots. Taking a look at the power supply side, we've got this RGB lighting bar which you can sync up with your motherboard. This comes in all versions of the Torrent, even the ones without the RGB fans, apart from the one that has the solid side panel, because obviously if you've got a solid side panel, you're not going to see this. Moving into the main body of the case, in terms of motherboard support, we can fit either mini ITX or mini DTX motherboards. In terms of fan support, the case comes with a 180mm fan pre-installed at the front. It is possible to remove this, and using the brackets that come in the accessory box, I'll show you that later on, you can fit either two 120 or two 140mm fans at the front. At the bottom of the case, we can fit either two 120 or two 140mm fans, while at the rear it's a single 120mm fan. I do think the fan mounting locations at the bottom are actually going to be quite limited, so what I'm going to do is put a graphics card in the case just to show you what we can fit below the graphics card. So you can see here with our large 3060 that I'm planning on using this build, I've put a slim fan. It's 15mm in thickness beneath the graphics card, and in fact the graphics card is actually resting on top of the fan. So this would not be possible. If you're going to use a large graphics card like this, mounting fans beneath it is not really going to work. If we go with a more recently sized graphics card like this 3060 Ti, it is technically possible to fit a standard thickness 25mm fan below the graphics card, although the graphics card is actually resting on the fan, so this wouldn't be an option. In terms of slim fans, this is the same 15mm fan, and there is a tiny amount of a gap between the fan and the graphics card. Previously I have shown that when the fans are so close to the graphics card, you don't actually tend to get any benefit from them, and in fact it can actually make the temperatures worse in certain circumstances. The other reason you might want to stay away from the slim fans is they tend to be significantly noisier than the standard thickness fans, so you're not going to get an awful lot of benefit, might even make temperatures worse, and you're going to be adding much more noise into your build. So for me, I would probably stay away from the bottom mounted fans in this case. The other thing to mention, if you do want to install fans at the bottom of the case, you're going to have to remove these feet to give you access to the mounting holes at the bottom. In terms of GPU support, the case can accommodate large graphics cards up to 335mm in length, and you can see a large reason for this is because they install underneath the front 180mm fan. If you want to take these 180mm fans away and replace them with 120s or 140mm fans, they're obviously going to go down towards the bottom of the case. And if you use standard thickness fans, that's going to reduce your clearance to 310mm for your graphics card. Again, if you go with radiators and fans in the front with an AIO, again your GPU support is going to be reduced further. So it's 335mm to the front of the case, that's your clearance, and obviously anything you put in front of it, subtract that away and work out what graphics card will fit. In terms of radiator support, at the front of the case you can fit either a 240, 140 or 120mm radiator, while at the rear you're limited to a 120mm radiator. If you want to go with a custom loop, we've got a little cutout here where you can mount your reservoir. The Torrent Nano comes with 2 accessory boxes. I'll show you what's inside them now. This is everything that's contained in the 2 accessory boxes. We've got a polishing cloth and a range of screws. I'll not go through the screws individually because the manual has a nice diagram that shows you what each of them does. We've got our cable ties for cable management. In the bigger box then we have a GPU support bracket, and the 2 brackets you're going to need if you want to remove the front 180mm fan and either mount 120, 140mm fans at the front or a radiator. So although I'm not installing any SATA drives in this build, I will show you how to install them. First of all, starting off with the bracket at the back of the case, we can fit 2 drives side by side on this. So all we need to do is set the drive into place, turn the bracket over, and then you're going to want to use these screws that have a little lip around the outside to secure the drive to the bracket. So there we go, that's our drive secured into place, and if you wanted you could put another drive beside it. Next, I want to show you how to install the drives in the drive tray at the top of the case. So as we've mentioned, in the tray itself, you can fit either one 2.5 inch or one 3.5 inch drive, while the underside, you can fit a 2.5 inch drive. So we're going to need to start with the one on the underside. So I'll show you how to install it. All we need to do is set the drive on top, turn things over, and then we're going to use exactly the same screws we used on the other bracket. To install a 3.5 inch drive, we just need to set it into place in the drive tray. Then we need to use 4 of these hard drive mounting screws to secure the drive at each corner. If instead we want to install two 2.5 inch drives in the tray, we're first of all going to have to remove these rubber mounts from the side. We then need to slide the mounts through these holes here. To our second SATA drive, we've got these little pegs to go into each corner. Then all we need to do is line the pegs up with the rubber holes and push the drive into place. And there we go, we've got our hard drive tray with a SATA drive installed on each side. Next thing for us to install is our GPU support bracket. So we're going to take this little rubber pad, set it into the top of the bracket, and then take a thumb screw and screw it in from the bottom. We're just going to put the thumb screw in loosely first of all, because what we're going to want to do is install this in the case, then slide this to the right place to line it up to where this is supporting our GPU, and then tighten it up. And you can see this little rubber pad is going to provide good support to the GPU. Now, if you have a particularly large GPU, having this thumb screw at the bottom is going to influence how low down you can get the GPU support bracket. So Fractal do have another option. If we remove the thumb screw, we can then add an ordinary screw at the bottom. And what you'll see now is we're going to be able to get the GPU support bracket even lower. So if you have a large graphics card like us, this is going to be particularly useful. When you're assembling your GPU support bracket, you're going to have to take real care not to assemble it upside down. So this is an upside down where we've got the rubber pad here and the thumb screw here. The problem with this is you're not going to be able to lower this all the way down to the bottom of the case. And because you can't do that, you've got quite a distance between here, and if you've got a large graphics card like we do, you're never going to be able to fit it in on top of the GPU support bracket. In fact, this is what I actually did when I was making this build guide. I've had to go back and record this step, so this step of assembling the bracket is recorded in the future from the rest of the build guide. And when I went to install the GPU, I couldn't actually get it fitted on top of the bracket, and I ended up just removing the GPU support bracket at this stage. So if you keep an eye out later in the video, you will see this installed upside down. We then need to line our GPU support bracket up with this cutout down at the bottom right hand side. So what you'll notice is I've just put the thumb screws on loosely first of all, because we're going to be able to install our GPU. We can then slide this up to where it's supporting the GPU and tighten up the thumb screws. The last optional thing to show you before we get on with the build is how to remove this fan and use the brackets in the accessory box if you wanted to go with a radiator or 120 or 140mm fans at the front. So the first thing to do is to remove the fan. I've already freed up the cables. It's held on with 4 screws. Next, we've got 2 panels to remove. They're each held on with 4 screws. So now we need to add these brackets to the front. If you note, we've got 2 holes. There's a 140 and there's a 120. And obviously these go in 2 different positions depending on whether you want to mount 140 or 120mm fans at the front. So what we can do, there's 2 notches here, one here and one here, one here and one here. And this is what we need to line the notches here up with. So we'll go for this one first of all. And then it just pushes into place. You can see now the hole that's lined up with the holes of the case in the bottom is labelled 120. And this is what you would do if you wanted to install 120mm fans. I'm going to show you a 140 at the front, so we're going to need to install it in the one towards the outer bit of the case. So we pull it out from here, slide the little notches through this hole here, and then push in. And you'll notice that's labelled 140. Then we just need to take 2 of the screws that we have just removed and secure the panel to the case. Same thing on the other side. So you can see now if we wanted to, we could install 2 140mm fans down at the bottom, and the holes line up very nicely with the bracket that's in place. As I mentioned at the start, this isn't what we're going to go with for this build, so I'm going to go ahead and put the front 180mm fan back in place. We're now ready to start working the motherboard, and the first thing I want to do is install our CPU. So we need to open the clip by pulling it down and out, lift it all the way to the top, and then we can open the slot cover. We can insert our CPU into the socket with the text facing the correct way round. There's little notches on the bottom of the CPU and notches in the socket to help line things up. Next we can close the cover down, and if we apply a little bit of pressure here, the black plastic protector will pop off. Then we can close the lever again, pushing it all the way down and securing it onto the little clip. The motherboard has two M.2 SSD sockets. There's one in the front behind this heatsink and one in the rear in the board. Our Gen 4 drive is going to run hotter than our Gen 3 drive, so we're going to install it on the front behind this heatsink. We've got two screws to remove. We can then lift the heatsink off. So it's great to see BIOSTAR have already installed the screw we're going to need in the standoff rather than having to search in the motherboard box for it. So we'll go ahead and remove the screw. We can then insert our drive into the socket at a slight angle and then secure it into place with the screw we've just removed. Before we replace the heatsink, we could remove the plastic protection. On the rear of the motherboard, we've got our second M.2 socket, so we just need to remove the screw from the standoff. We can insert our drive into the socket, flatten it down, and secure into place with the screw we've just removed. We're now ready to install our RAM, so I'm going to open the clips on both slots. We can line the RAM up with the slot. Once we're happy everything's lined up, just some firm pressure to the top, and the RAM is going to clip into place, and the clips on both sides are going to close. The same thing with our second stick, line it up, and then some firm pressure. We can then insert the back plate for our LJ1700 mounting bracket. Then we've got one of these standoffs to put onto each corner. There's a flat end and there's an end where you can put a screwdriver into, so it's obviously the flat end that goes onto the motherboard. Then we've got this bracket to go on top, and we can secure it into place with two screws. We've got another bracket for the bottom. We can then add some thermal paste to the CPU. Just before we add our CPU cooler, we're going to have to open these screw holes up. And we're also going to want to remove the plastic protection. When we lower our CPU down, we're going to have this little bracket in place, and then we're going to put a screw through each of these holes to secure it to the bracket we already fitted to the motherboard. So I'm going to lower the CPU cooler down into place. Then we're going to want to pass the included screwdriver through the hole, pass the screw onto it, and then secure the cooler down onto the bracket down beneath. And then the same thing at the top of the motherboard. And then I'm just going to tighten each screw in turn. And we can then cover up the holes at the top. Next we can insert our second fan into the middle, making sure the blades are orientated the same way as the fan on the front. Then we've got these clips to insert through the holes on the fans. And then we can apply some pressure to them just by pressing here and here. And that's going to secure the fan to the heatsink. Same thing with our other fan, pass the clips through the holes on the fan. And then we just simply need to apply a little bit of pressure. And the clips are going to slot into place. Then we need to plug both of our fans into this double fan splitter cable. And the other end into our CPU fan header, which is just here at the top of the motherboard. Now I'm just going to tuck all the excess cable in under the heatsink. Just before we put the motherboard into the case, I want to plug in our 8-pin EPS power cable. So go ahead and line it up with the slot and push into place. We can then set the motherboard into the case. Before I line the motherboard up with the standoffs, I'm just purposely going to put it down towards the bottom of the case and bring our 8-pin EPS cable through this little cutout at the top to the power supply compartment. At this stage I want to get everything plugged into the top of the motherboard that's going to need to be plugged in. There's only one additional connector, and it's this ARGB connector coming from our fan at the front. So I'm going to bring it through the same cutout as the EPS cable and get it plugged into the ARGB header at the top of the motherboard. With those two cables plugged in, we can now line the motherboard up with the standoffs at the back. And then we'll get the motherboard secured into place with the screws from the accessory box. So getting that top screw at the top left hand side of the motherboard in was an absolute nightmare. I probably spent about 10 minutes or so trying to get it in. The difficulty is trying to get the screwdriver in past the CPU cooler, and what I ended up doing was using an extra long screwdriver, sliding it in from the side where I was just about able to reach the screw hole, but then I was getting the screw lined up in the hole straight so that I could get it screwed in. What I do think would be easier if you get one of those flexible screw tips that you can actually fit in from this cutout here. Some of you may well be wondering why not install the motherboard first and then put the cooler onto the motherboard. The reason for that is you would get most of the cooler installed, okay, it would be a bit more difficult. The downside would be you wouldn't actually be able to fit the middle fan in because it needs to be slid in from the bottom, and there's not enough space between the cooler and the bottom of the case to actually be able to slide that fan into place. Next, I want to get some of our case cables plugged in. Our HD audio cable is going to go in this header over to the bottom left hand side of the motherboard. So we can bring it through the bottom cutout, and we're going to need to plug it in with the HD audio text facing down the way. Just above our HD audio cable, we've got our motherboard's one and only system fan header. So I'm going to plug in a fan splitter cable into that header. And then I'm going to bring the end of the fan splitter cable through to the back of the case through that bottom cutout. Then we've got our front panel connectors, which are going to go into this header here. Starting off with the top row, working from left to right, we're going to plug in power LED positive and power LED negative. Next to that, we can plug in our power switch. And in the bottom row then, directly in front of the power switch, we're going to plug in a reset switch. Next to that header, we've got our USB 3.0 header. We're now ready to install our power supply. I've gone ahead and plugged the cables in that we're going to need. So we've got a 24-pin connector and we've got a single PCIe cable. It's going to have two 8-pin connectors on it, which is exactly what we need for our graphics card. Just before we install the power supply, there is this button here for zero fan mode. So if the power supply is under low load, the fan will stop spinning, reducing the noise in the build. So that's turned to on at the moment, which is exactly the way I want it. Our power supply has an intake fan. Because our top panel is going to be solid and we've got some perforations down here, we're going to want to install this with the fan facing down the way. So we can go ahead and set this in and then slide it all the way to the back. We can then use these large screws from the accessory box to secure the power supply into place. We can then bring our EPS cable up and plug it into the power supply. And then there's plenty of space in here for the cables, so I'm just going to bring the EPS cable into the bottom here. We can then bring our power supply's 24-pin connector through and get it plugged into the motherboard. We're now ready to install our rear case fan, so I'm just going to pass the cables through to the back. Then we can secure the fan at the back using the screws that came with the fan. Then we need to get our two case fans plugged into our fan splitter cable. Now I only had a triple fan splitter cable available, but a double fan splitter cable is going to be absolutely fine. And originally I had brought it through this cutout, but I've now moved it to this cutout because I think it's going to be better out of the way of the graphics card. Now if we look at our fan splitter cable, not so easy for you to see, but one of them has 4 pins and the other two have 3 pins. So we just have to make sure that one of our fans goes into the 4-pin connector. So I'm going to take our front fan, the PWM connector, and plug it into the 4-pin connector. And then we've got our rear fan here. We'll route the cable through and plug it into one of the spare connectors. Next we want to get our ARGB connected up. So we've already plugged the front fan into the ARGB header on the motherboard. One of the nice things that all these Fractal fans have is they have an additional ARGB connector on each of the fans to allow you to daisy chain another fan or device into them. So I'm going to take the ARGB connector from our rear fan and plug it into the front fan. There we go. And Again, our rear fan has an additional connector, which is good because we have one spare RGB connector to plug into it. The lighting bar on the personalized shroud has another RGB connector, so we can go ahead and plug that in, and that's all the RGB connected up. Next, I just want to route our PCIe cable through this little cutout at the bottom, so it's ready for us to plug in when we install our graphics card. Just to point out, you might notice I haven't plugged in our Type-C connector because our motherboard doesn't have one. Obviously, if your motherboard does, make sure you plug it in. So I'm just going to keep this up here at the top of the case. We are now ready to install our graphics card, so I'm just going to remove all three of the expansion slot covers. We are only going to need to remove the top two to fit our graphics card in, but I have found the additional thumb screws can get in the way of mounting the graphics card, and it's better just to remove them, particularly when space is limited. And then I'm just going to open the PCIe slot on the motherboard. I'm going to lower the graphics card into the case, lining it up with the slot. Once we're happy everything's lined up, it's just a little bit of firm pressure to get the graphics card to clip into place. There we go, that's the graphics card clipped in and the slot on the motherboard has closed. And then we'll just get things secured into place with the two thumb screws we removed at the start. I can then slide our bottom PCI expansion slot cover back into place and secured at the top with a thumb screw. We can then plug our power cables into the graphics card. I'm just going to use one of the included cable ties to keep these cables together. Last thing to do is some cable management with plenty of Velcro cable straps and plenty of space up at the top of the case to manage our cables. So that's the build complete. It's now time to flip the power switch and see if it works. Importantly, I've already loaded a Windows 11 bootable USB drive into the back of the PC. If you don't know how to make one of those, I've made a video on it and you'll find a link to it in the description. Okay, here goes. Okay, that looks good. We've got fans spinning and lighting on the motherboard. So we now just need to watch the monitor and see what happens. Okay, that's us through to the Windows installer screen. What I'm going to do now is show you how to install Windows 11, but to make it a little bit easier, I'm going to switch over to the screen mode. So over the next lot of screens, I'm going to pick the options that are relevant to me. If you have different options relevant to you, you should pick the ones that apply to you. So I'm from the United Kingdom, I'm going to click Next. I'm going to click on Install Now. If you've got a Windows product key, go ahead and put it in here. If you don't have one, click I don't have a product key. I'm going to select Windows 11 Pro is the one I'm going to get a key for, and click Next. I'm going to accept the terms, click Next, and I'm going to go for Custom Install. Okay, I want to install Windows on our Gen 4 drive, so I'm going to select it and click Next. This next stage will take a little bit of time, so I'm going to skip through it. Okay, I'm from the United Kingdom, I'm going to click on Yes, Yes again, and I'm going to skip a secondary keyboard. So we're going to have to name the device, and click Next, and then the PC will restart. Okay, we can click on Next. I'm going to set this up for personal use, click Next. I'm going to type in my email, and then my password. I'm going to need to create a PIN. I'm going to click on Set up as a new device, click Next. I'm going to let apps use my location, click Accept. Yes to find my device. I'm just going to go for the required, click Accept. No to inking, Accept. No, Accept. No, Accept. I'm going to skip this for now. I'm going to only save files to this PC. I'm going to say no thanks. Okay, that's Windows installed. First thing I want to do is get Windows fully up to date. So we click on the Windows icon, click on Settings. We're going to go down to Windows Update, and then we're going to click on Download Now. What we're going to do, we're going to install all these. Windows may well need to restart a number of times, but we're going to keep coming back until there's no more updates and only move forward then. Okay, that's Windows fully up to date. Whenever I click on check for updates, there's no further updates available. Next thing I want to do is get all our SSDs to show up, because if we go over to this PC, what you will notice is that actually only one of our drives is showing up. So what we need to do is go down to the search bar, type in disk management, and create and format hard drive partitions will come up. We'll click on that. And you can see here we've got our second drive showing up as unallocated space. So if we right click on it, click new simple volume, next, next. It's assigned the letter D. If you want to change it, you can do from the pull down menu. And we just need to give it a name. I'm going to store my games here, so I'm going to call it games and click next and finish. So we can close this down, and what you'll see now, both of our SSDs are showing up. Next thing to do is install our drivers. So we head over to our motherboards page on BIOSTAR's website. We're in the download tab. We just need to select our operating system. So it's Windows 11 we're going to select, and we'll have a look and see what downloads are available. Just having a look here, the latest version of the BIOS available is the initial version of the BIOS, it says. So it doesn't seem like there's an update available yet, so I'm not going to be able to show you how to update the BIOS today. So drivers that we're going to want the chipset driver, the management engine, the LAN drivers, the onboard audio, the BIOS screen utility. I'm not going to download that. BIOS update utility, I'm not going to download that. Intel Rapid Storage, I'm not going to download that, or the SATA drives. The Racing GTN utility, we do need something to be able to control the RGB in our build. I'm not sure if this will let me do it or whether I'm going to be able to do it from the BIOS, so we'll download this and we can take a look at that. And the onboard VGA, we've got a dedicated graphics card, so we're not going to need that. Okay, so if we head over to our downloads folder, we're going to right click on each of the files and click extract all and extract. Okay, I'm then just going to delete the compressed folders. And we'll make a start with installing these, starting off with the chipset. Click yes, next, accept, install. We're going to need to restart, so we'll do this now. Okay, we'll install the management engine. Click yes, next. We're going to accept, click next, next, and finish. Okay, so working our way up. Click yes. Okay, so that just shut down without actually doing anything. I'm not sure if that's installed the drivers. Normally there's a series of screens to go through like you've seen with these other two. We'll try the one at the top as well. Like I say, this is my first time using a BIOSTAR motherboard, so I'm not so sure if this is normal for it or not. Fortunately, one of these is the LAN driver and the other one is the audio drivers. So our PC will normally find these from Windows, so whether they install them or not, we're probably actually okay. So we'll see what this one does. So I can't actually click on the setup, and again it's just disappeared. So I'm not going to worry too much about that. We'll click on Racing GT and click on the setup. Click yes. And we're going to have to reboot to do the setup, so we'll click on finish. And we'll restart our computer now. Okay, last driver to get is for our graphics card, so we need to head over to NVIDIA's website. Again, you'll find a link to this in the description. I've already populated the options we're going to need for our 3060. I'm going to click on search and click download and download again. We can click open file, click yes, and OK. Two options here, we can install the driver and the GeForce Experience, or just the driver. I'm just going to install the driver today. Click agree and continue. Just go for an express installation, click next, and we're going to have to restart, so I'll do that now. Okay, that's all our drivers installed. Let's take a look at this program. Okay, so heading into our racing utility, we've got some system information on the first page. The Vivid LED DJ looks like this is going to be our RGB software, so if I click on it, And at the moment, if you take a look at the PC, you can see both our fans and the bar at the top and the power supply shroud are set to blue. So this looks like a way to turn off the lighting. Yep, if I click this, it goes off. Click it again, it goes back on. At the moment, we're set to system, 12 volt and 5 volt. If I click on RGB sync, I think that's going to let me control all them together. At the moment, we're on permanent. If I click on shine, let's have a look and see what it does. So it flashes on and off with that. Breathe. It's going to breathe, and shine on music, I take it it's only going to do something if there's music on. So we'll go for permanent. And then we've got this color wheel where we can move around it to pick a different color. And you can see as I'm scrolling around the wheel, the RGB lighting is changing color. The only slight disappointing thing for me is it doesn't seem like there's a white color, which would be what my preferred color for this PC was going to be. So I think what I'm probably going to do is actually remove the RGB header from the motherboard and plug in a controller. It's going to be SATA powered, so I'm going to need to plug in a SATA power cable, and that's going to let me set the lighting to white. Okay, so that's my LED controller that I have from another AIO plugged in, set to white, and the fans look great on that to me. We've got one more bit of RGB software I need to get, and that's for our graphics card. Although our graphics card is currently set to white, by default it will be on rainbow. It's just saved the white from a previous build, so I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so we head over to our graphics cards page over at MSI's website. I've selected Windows 11 64-bit, and the utility we're going to want to get is the MSI Center. So I'll go ahead and download that. File, click yes, click OK, install, and we'll click on finish. So we can right click on the MSI Center and we're going to click on Run as Administrator. Click yes. We're going to have to scan down to the bottom of this long list. Click that we've read it and click on OK. Click on Start Now, Next, Next. And what we're going to want is the Mystic Light, so we'll click on Install and then we can click on Open. So you can see as the application's opened, the effect on the graphics card has changed to rainbow. So that's really straightforward to change. We can just go over here and we can click on Steady. If I want white, I can type it manually, or all I need to do is drag this to the top to get white, and then I can click Apply, and that's changed the lighting on the graphics card to white. Obviously, you can go for whatever effect you want. Okay, that's our graphics card now set to white. The only thing in the system that we don't have any control over is the RAM. Quite often your motherboard utility will control the RAM. I don't see any way to do this. Kingston do have their own program to do this, so the Fury Control, will go ahead and download it. Click Open, and we'll click on Get. And then we can click on Open. We're going to have to scan down to the bottom. We're going to click Yes, we agree, and Apply. Click Yes. Okay, so we can see that's currently set to the default color. If I want to set it to a solid white, let's go for that. One color, click white. And there we go, we've got our RAM changed to white. So to enter the BIOS, we need to restart our computer. And we're going to press the delete key whenever the BIOSTAR logo appears. If I press delete now, this should take us into the BIOS. Okay, that's us into our BIOS. I'm not as familiar with the BIOSTAR BIOS. This is my first BIOSTAR motherboard, but we can see our BIOS version here. And like I said, there was no version that we could update it to. Now I'm just looking up the top. We do have AI fan, so we'll click on it. And what we can see, it is saying our CPU fan is running at 500 revs per minute. Let's see. It's on auto, so let's change it over to PWM. And let's try quiet and see will that bring our fan speed down. It's showing our system fan running at full speed. Yep, full speed here, up at 100%. So if we go ahead and select quiet for the system fans, perfect. The noise in the background is just disappearing. And you can see here we've actually got the fan speed to reduce quite significantly. So that is so much better. What I think I could do, if I want to, I can go into manual and I can adjust the fan curves by dragging them. But what I think I'm going to do, I'm going to leave the system fans running on quiet. The CPU fan, let's turn it to aggressive and let's see what that sounds like. And in fact, the Be Quiet fans are that quiet, I can't hear any difference at all. So I'm going to leave the fans on those settings, I think. Okay, so the only other thing I want to do in the BIOS is to enable our XMP profile on our RAM. So you can see here we've got two profiles. Profile 1 is 3600 megahertz, which is what we're looking for. Our RAM is currently running at 2400 megahertz. So we'll just see if there's a way to do that. Sometimes it's in the easy mode, there's a button to do it, so we'll click on that. We'll click on memory information. So we've got our XMP profile over here. So we can just go ahead and enable it. That's XMP profile 1, so that should be our RAM running at 3600 megahertz. So the PC sounds a whole lot better, and the lighting is the way I wanted, although I had to use a controller to get that. And we've now hopefully got our RAM running an XMP profile. So I'm going to click on Save and Exit. It's showing us the changes that we have done, and we're going to click on OK. And our PC should reboot into Windows. Next, I want to check our RAM is running at the 3600 megahertz we have set in the BIOS. So if I right click here and click on Task Manager, I click on More Details, click on Performance, click on Memory, and we can see our RAM is running at 3600 megahertz. Okay, that's the PC fully set up. It's running cool and quiet and looking great. What I'm going to do now is a full case review of the Torrent Nano. In that, I'm going to cover the thermals, any issues I had with the building, how I would build again, the things I liked and things I didn't like about the case. So if you are thinking of doing a build in this, you're probably going to want to check that out, and you'll find a link to that video in the description. So hopefully you found this video useful. If you have, please remember to give it a thumbs up. If you're not currently subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscribe button as well, and I'll see you in the next video.